I stared at my phone screen in disbelief. My paycheck was half gone. Just like that. My hands shook as I refreshed the banking app 3 times, hoping it was some kind of glitch. It wasn't. I marched straight to Dorian Burke's office, my heart pounding with every step. He sat behind his massive desk, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. When I knocked, he barely glanced up. "Dorian, there's something wrong with my paycheck," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He finally looked at me with those cold gray eyes. "You were 2 minutes late last Tuesday. Company policy says tardiness results in salary reduction. I'm just enforcing the rules." I felt my face burn with rage. 2 minutes. 2 minutes late because I had to drop my daughter off at daycare when her regular sitter was sick. And he cut my pay in half for that? "That's not reasonable," I started. "The handbook is clear," he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "Maybe you should read it sometime." I walked out of his office, shaking with anger, but something cold settled in my chest. "You're not getting away with this," I thought silently. 2 months earlier, everything had been different. I was riding high from being the top performer at our regional branch. When corporate offered me a transfer to headquarters, I thought it was my big break. Finally, a chance to prove myself on a bigger stage. My first day at HQ, everyone seemed welcoming enough. The office was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I felt like I belonged here, like I'd finally made it. Then came my first department meeting. Dorian introduced every new team member, except me. I sat there awkwardly as he moved on to the agenda, completely ignoring my presence. When I tried to speak up about a project idea, he cut me off mid-sentence. "We'll circle back to that later," he said, though we never did. After the meeting, a coworker named Marcus pulled me aside. "Don't take it personally," he whispered. "Dorian doesn't like change, especially when someone might outshine him." I laughed it off then, thinking Marcus was just being dramatic. I had no idea what I was walking into. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. Dorian wasn't just unfriendly, he saw me as a threat to his carefully constructed kingdom. The paycheck incident wasn't the first time something felt off. Over the past month, I'd noticed strange deductions appearing on my pay stubs. Little things at first that I figured were honest mistakes. One week, there was a $48 deduction for a policy violation I couldn't remember committing. When I asked payroll about it, they told me to take it up with my supervisor. Dorian just shrugged when I brought it up. "Says here you used company resources for personal business," he said, not even looking at the paperwork. "I just go by what the system tells me." The next week, it was $135 for unapproved overtime. But I'd specifically gotten approval from Dorian before staying late to finish a client presentation. When I reminded him, he acted like he had no memory of our conversation. "Do you have that approval in writing?" he asked with a smirk. Of course I didn't. Who asks for written approval to work overtime when your boss verbally tells you to stay late? I started keeping a notebook, writing down every deduction with dates and amounts. The pattern was becoming clear, but I needed proof that would hold up under scrutiny. That's when I decided to dig deeper into the time card situation. I remembered clearly walking into the building at 8:58 on that Tuesday morning. I always checked the lobby clock because I was paranoid about being late. I went down to security and asked to review the surveillance footage. The guard was hesitant at first, but I explained it was for payroll verification. Sure enough, the timestamp showed me walking through the door at 8:58 a.m. But when I checked my digital time card, it showed 9:02 a.m. Someone had manually edited my clock-in time. The system showed the modification was made by D. Burke at 3:47 p.m. that same day. My stomach dropped. This wasn't about enforcing company policy. This was deliberate sabotage. Dorian had intentionally changed my time card to create a reason to dock my pay. I took screenshots of everything: the security footage timestamp, the edited time card, and the modification log. My hands were shaking as I saved the files to my personal drive. This was evidence of fraud, and I was holding it in my hands. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt a spark of hope. Dorian had made a mistake, and I was going to make sure it cost him. Armed with my evidence, I marched straight to the HR department. The office was sterile and white, with motivational posters about teamwork and integrity covering the walls. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat across from Patricia Wilson, the HR director, and laid out everything. The unexplained deductions, the edited time card, the pattern of retaliation. I showed her my screenshots and documentation, expecting her to be as outraged as I was. Instead, she listened with a neutral expression, occasionally nodding, but showing no real emotion. When I finished, she closed my file and gave me a thin smile. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," she said in a practiced tone. "However, our policy is that if the discrepancy is under $1,000, we leave it to department-level discretion." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "But he's committing fraud," I said, my voice rising. "That's a strong accusation without concrete proof of intent," Patricia replied coolly. "I'll make a note in your file, but disciplinary matters fall under your supervisor's purview." I left that office feeling more frustrated than ever. The system was rigged, and Dorian knew exactly how to exploit it. But I wasn't giving up. If HR wouldn't help me, I'd find another way. I stopped arguing and started collecting. Every email, every time card, every pay stub went into my growing file. I kept 2 copies of everything, one locked in my desk at home, another on an encrypted flash drive that never left my purse. During my lunch breaks, I started casually talking to other employees. Not asking direct questions, just friendly conversations that gradually revealed a disturbing pattern. Dorian had a history of targeting certain people with policy enforcement. Marcus told me about getting written up for dress code violations that made no sense. A woman named Brenda mentioned strange overtime deductions that appeared and disappeared from her paychecks. Each story was slightly different, but the common thread was always Dorian. "He picks someone new every few months," Marcus explained during coffee one morning. "Usually someone who threatens his position or questions his decisions. Then he makes their life miserable until they quit." "Why doesn't anyone report him?" I asked. Marcus laughed bitterly. "People have tried. HR always sides with management. It's easier to just keep your head down and hope you're not next." But I wasn't built to keep my head down. And I was becoming convinced that Dorian's behavior went beyond just workplace bullying. Something bigger was going on. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During lunch one day, I sat with Ava Martinez, a quiet junior accountant who usually ate alone while reading. She seemed nervous around management, but opened up when we talked about our kids. "It's nice having another mom in the office," she said softly. "Most people here don't understand the juggling act." As we talked, she mentioned something that made my ears perk up. "I process some weird expense reports sometimes. Like last month, Dorian submitted a $4,500 receipt for scuba diving lessons. He said it was for executive development." I nearly choked on my sandwich. "Scuba diving for executive development?" Ava shrugged. "I just enter what gets approved, but it seemed strange. I mean, we're in the middle of the country. When would he use scuba skills for work?" I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was racing. If Dorian was willing to manipulate time cards for small amounts, what else might he be doing with company money? Ava had just handed me a thread that could unravel something much bigger. "Does he submit a lot of unusual expenses?" I asked casually. "More than most executives," Ava admitted, "but I probably shouldn't be talking about this." I assured her our conversation would stay between us, but I was already planning my next move. That night, I started digging into Dorian's expense history. As a department coordinator, I had access to basic financial reports, though not the detailed breakdowns. What I found made my blood boil. 3 months ago, Dorian had submitted expenses for a team strategy retreat in Cuba. The total was over $8,000 for a week-long trip. But when I cross-referenced it with our team calendar, there was no record of any retreat. In fact, Dorian had marked that week as personal vacation time. I dug deeper into the receipts attached to the expense report. Luxury hotel suites, spa treatments, premium cigars, expensive dinners for one. This wasn't a business retreat. It was a personal vacation funded by the company. The more I looked, the more I found. A client dinner in Las Vegas that coincided with a boxing match he'd posted about on social media. Professional development courses that were actually expensive hobbies. Equipment purchases for his home office that somehow became business expenses. I was looking at systematic theft, carefully disguised as legitimate business expenses. And I was documenting every single fraudulent charge. My daughter was asleep in the next room as I worked late into the night, building a case that would hopefully put an end to Dorian's reign of terror once and for all. The next morning, I made a crucial mistake. I got careless with my research and used my work computer to access some financial databases. By noon, I had a visitor. Dorian appeared at my desk with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Interesting browser history you've got there, Shannon. Lot of curiosity coming from someone in your position. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady, just trying to understand our department's budget allocation. You know, being thorough with my work. Curious people sometimes make mistakes, he said, leaning closer. Big mistakes that can affect their career prospects. Do we understand each other? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He walked away, but the message was clear. He was watching me now. That night, I went through my work laptop with a fine-tooth comb, deleting every trace of my research. I reformatted the hard drive and reinstalled everything from scratch. If Dorian wanted to play surveillance games, I wasn't going to make it easy for him. From now on, all my investigating would happen from home, on my personal equipment. He'd shown his hand by threatening me, which meant I was getting close to something big. The predator had just revealed he felt cornered, and cornered animals make dangerous mistakes. Opportunity came knocking 2 weeks later. Dorian announced that he needed help with the quarterly budget review, and surprisingly, he asked me to assist. I was suspicious of his sudden friendliness, but I wasn't about to pass up this chance. I want to learn from the best, I told him with fake enthusiasm. This could really help me understand how operations work at this level. His ego couldn't resist the flattery. Finally, someone who appreciates proper management, he said smugly. Most people don't understand the complexities of what I do. He granted me temporary access to the departmental financial ledgers, thinking he was doing me a favor. What he was really doing was handing me the keys to his kingdom. I spent the next 3 days buried in spreadsheets, cross-referencing expenses with vendor records and timeline data. The scope of the fraud was breathtaking. Dorian hadn't just stolen money. He'd built an entire system for funneling company funds into his personal accounts. But I had to be careful. I couldn't print anything or save files to my work computer. Instead, I memorized account numbers and took discreet photos with my phone when no one was looking. Every piece of evidence I gathered brought me closer to exposing the truth about Dorian Burke. The smoking gun came in the form of a vendor called Strategic Solutions Consulting. Over the past year, this company had received $72,000 in payments for vague consulting services that I couldn't find any record of. When I looked up Strategic Solutions Consulting, the address listed was just a P.O. box. But that address seemed familiar, so I cross-referenced it with Dorian's personnel file. It was the same address he'd used for emergency contact information. The consultant receiving payments was listed as D. Sullivan. Close enough to D. Burke to avoid immediate suspicion, but different enough to pass a casual review. The bank routing number for payments traced back to an account that Dorian had access to. I sat in my car after work, staring at the evidence on my phone screen. $72,000. That was more than my annual salary, stolen piece by piece through fake consulting fees. My hands were shaking as I saved the photos to my encrypted drive. This wasn't just about my docked paycheck anymore. Dorian had been systematically stealing from the company for months, maybe years. I finally had proof that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. The question now was how to use it without putting myself in danger. I went back to HR, but this time I was smarter about it. Instead of showing Patricia everything, I gave her just enough to force an investigation without revealing the full scope of what I'd discovered. I found some irregularities in vendor payments that might need review, I said, handing her a folder with carefully selected documents. I thought the company should be aware of potential financial discrepancies. Patricia's demeanor changed when she saw the dollar amounts involved. Suddenly, this wasn't a minor employee complaint. It was potential corporate fraud. "Shannon, you're not authorized to conduct financial reviews," she said, but her tone was more concerned than dismissive. This kind of investigation needs to go through proper channels. I understand, I replied. I just thought the company would want to know about possible irregularities before they became bigger problems. She promised to look into it and opened a private case file. For the first time, I felt like someone was actually listening to me. But I also knew that Dorian would soon realize an investigation was starting. The real battle was just beginning, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The audit started quietly, but Dorian's instincts were sharp. Within a week, I could tell he sensed something was wrong. He started watching me more closely, questioning my work, and excluding me from important meetings. Then came the isolation tactics. He moved my desk to a corner of the office where I couldn't see or hear what was happening with the rest of the team. Projects I'd been working on were suddenly reassigned to other people without explanation. We're restructuring workflows for better efficiency, he announced during a team meeting, not making eye contact with me. Some responsibilities are being redistributed to optimize performance. Translation: he was cutting me out of anything important while the investigation was ongoing. Marcus gave me sympathetic looks from across the office, but no one was brave enough to speak up. They all knew that crossing Dorian meant becoming his next target. I kept my head down and did my assigned work, but I was also documenting every act of retaliation. If this went to court, I wanted a record of how Dorian had tried to punish me for reporting his crimes. The tension in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife, and everyone could feel it. The retaliation escalated when Dorian issued my first ever poor performance review. I sat in his office, reading words that described someone I didn't recognize. Uncooperative attitude toward management directives. Demonstrates disrespectful behavior during team interactions. Fails to maintain professional boundaries regarding confidential information. Every criticism was carefully crafted to justify potential termination while avoiding any mention of my actual work quality. He was building a paper trail to fire me before the investigation could conclude. This is completely unfair, I said, trying to keep my voice professional. My work quality has never been questioned before. Performance standards evolve, Dorian replied coldly. What worked at your previous position may not meet our expectations here. He was laying the groundwork to get rid of me, and we both knew it. The review would go in my permanent file, creating justification for future disciplinary action. But I signed the document without argument, knowing that fighting it would only escalate the situation. I had bigger battles to win, and this performance review would actually work in my favor when I needed to prove retaliation. Dorian thought he was cornering me, but he was actually giving me more ammunition for my case. That night, I made the call that would change everything. Our company had an anonymous whistleblower hotline, and I'd been debating whether to use it. After the performance review, I knew I was out of time. I sat in my car outside my daughter's daycare, speaking to a neutral-sounding operator who took down every detail I provided. The fake vendor payments, the manipulated timecards, the retaliation tactics, everything went into an official report. We'll need documentation to support these allegations, the operator said. Can you provide evidence? I have extensive documentation, I replied. Photos, screenshots, financial records, email communications, everything is time-stamped and organized. The operator gave me a case number and instructions for securely submitting my evidence. Within 48 hours, everything I'd collected would be in the hands of corporate investigators. I hung up feeling a mixture of relief and terror. There was no going back now. Either my evidence would be strong enough to bring down Dorian, or I'd just signed my own termination papers. But looking at my daughter through the daycare window, I knew I'd made the right choice. Some fights are worth the risk. The next morning, Dorian called an emergency department meeting. Everyone filed into the conference room with confused expressions, wondering what crisis had prompted the urgent gathering. Dorian stood at the head of the table, his usual composed demeanor cracking slightly around the edges. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. It's come to my attention that someone on this team has been engaging in sabotage, he announced, scanning our faces. Someone here has been spreading malicious rumors and attempting to undermine this department's integrity. The room was dead silent. I kept my expression neutral, but my heart was racing. I want to be clear, Dorian continued. This kind of behavior is unacceptable. If the responsible party doesn't come forward, there will be consequences for everyone. He was fishing, trying to smoke out whoever had reported him. But his paranoid outburst was actually working against him. I could see confusion and concern on my coworkers' faces as they realized something serious was happening. Marcus caught my eye across the table, and I gave him the slightest shake of my head. The room was shifting, and Dorian's desperate anger was only making him look more guilty. 3 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The caller ID just showed corporate services, which could mean anything. "This is Shannon Monroe," I answered cautiously. "Miss Monroe, this is Michael Chen from Corporate Legal. We've received your whistleblower report and need to schedule an in-person meeting to discuss your allegations." My stomach dropped. This was really happening. "We'd like you to come in tomorrow at 2 p.m. You'll be meeting with myself, the chief financial officer, and a representative from our external audit firm." I agreed to the meeting, but spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous energy. This was the moment of truth. Either my evidence would be convincing enough to take action, or I'd be dismissed as a disgruntled employee making false accusations. That night, I went through my documentation one more time, organizing everything into a clear timeline. Screenshots, photos, financial records, emails. It was all there, building an undeniable case against Dorian. I barely slept, running through potential questions and rehearsing my presentation. Tomorrow would determine whether justice would be served or if I'd end up as another casualty of corporate politics. The meeting was scheduled in a sterile conference room on the executive floor, a place I'd never been before. 3 serious-looking people sat across from me. Michael from Legal, CFO Rebecca Martinez, and an external auditor named Thomas Wright. "We've reviewed your initial submission," Michael began, "and we need to verify some details. But first, we want to test something." They handed me a stack of vendor invoices and asked me to review them for accuracy. Buried in the middle was a duplicate payment authorization for $53,000 to Strategic Solutions Consulting, the same fake vendor Dorian had been using. The payment was scheduled to process that afternoon. I could approve it with a simple signature, and in the chaos of processing, it would likely go unnoticed. No one in the room indicated they knew about the duplicate. My hands trembled as I reviewed each invoice carefully. When I reached the duplicate payment, I immediately flagged it. "This looks like a duplicate," I said, showing them the discrepancy. "The same invoice was processed last month. We should cancel this payment and notify finance about the error." The 3 executives exchanged glances. Rebecca smiled for the first time since I'd entered the room. "That was a test," she said. "We planted that duplicate to see what you would do." Monday morning brought chaos. Dorian stormed into the office like a man possessed, his usual composure completely shattered. He called another emergency meeting, but this time his anger was focused directly on me. "This witch hunt needs to stop," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Shannon Monroe has been spreading lies and manipulating documents to make me look bad. This is harassment, and I'm considering legal action." The accusations hung in the air like poison. Several of my coworkers looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up in my defense. The smart ones were keeping their heads down, not wanting to get caught in the crossfire. "I have evidence of her misconduct," Dorian continued, waving a folder. "She's been accessing confidential files without authorization and sharing proprietary information outside the company." I sat silently through his rant, knowing that anything I said would only escalate the situation. His desperation was showing, and that meant the investigation was making progress. After the meeting, Marcus approached my desk quietly. "Whatever's happening," he whispered, "most of us know you're not the problem here." That small show of support meant more than he could know. Even if I was fighting this battle alone, at least some people could see through Dorian's lies. The official announcement came on a Wednesday afternoon via company-wide email. The subject line read, "Personnel Update, Operations Department," and I opened it with shaking hands. Effective immediately, Dorian Burke has been suspended pending the completion of an internal investigation. During this period, Rebecca Martinez will oversee Operations Department functions. The email was brief and professional, but the implications were enormous. They'd found enough evidence to take action, and Dorian's reign of terror was officially over. Within an hour, HR conducted a formal investigation interview with me. This time, Patricia was accompanied by a corporate investigator and a legal representative. They went through my evidence piece by piece, asking detailed questions about dates, amounts, and documentation methods. The investigation has confirmed multiple violations of company policy and potentially criminal conduct, the investigator explained. Your evidence was instrumental in uncovering systematic financial fraud. They thanked me for my courage in reporting the misconduct, but warned that criminal charges might be filed, which could require my testimony. I left that meeting feeling vindicated but exhausted. The fight was far from over, but at least now I wasn't fighting alone. As the investigation expanded, the true scope of Dorian's misconduct became clear. He hadn't just targeted me. There were at least 6 other employees who'd suffered similar retaliation over the past 2 years. Brenda, the woman who'd mentioned strange paycheck deductions, had lost over $3,000 to Dorian's policy enforcement. Another employee had been forced to sell her car to make rent after Dorian docked her pay for manufactured violations. I spent my evenings helping HR compile refund documentation for all the affected employees. It was painstaking work, cross-referencing timecards with security footage and building cases for every stolen dollar. The human cost of Dorian's behavior was staggering. He hadn't just stolen money, he'd caused real hardship for working families. Single parents had struggled to pay for childcare. People had skipped meals to make ends meet. Marcus found me working late one night, organizing paperwork by the light of my desk lamp. You didn't have to do this, he said, gesturing to the stacks of documents. This isn't your responsibility. Yes, it is, I replied. If I'd stayed quiet, this would have kept happening to other people. 2 weeks later, I received a call that changed everything. Rebecca Martinez asked me to come to her office for a private conversation, and her tone suggested it was important. I sat across from her desk, nervous about what she might say. Rebecca had always seemed fair, but I wasn't sure where I stood in the aftermath of the investigation. 3 days ago, we conducted an integrity test, she began, and we wanted to discuss the results with you personally. She explained that the duplicate payment I'd caught during our meeting hadn't been an accident. It was a deliberate test to see what I would do when given the opportunity to participate in fraud. You had every opportunity to approve that payment, Rebecca continued. $53,000 would have disappeared into the same account Dorian was using, and no one would have questioned your involvement. Instead, you immediately flagged it as suspicious and took steps to prevent the fraud. That tells us everything we need to know about your character. She slid a formal letter across her desk. We'd like to offer you a position as Director of Operations, effective immediately. I stared at the letter, reading the words but not quite believing them. Director of Operations, Dorian's old job. The final chapter of Dorian's story came with another company-wide email, this one with a more serious tone. The subject line read, Termination and Legal Action, Personnel Update. Following the completion of our internal investigation, Dorian Burke has been terminated for confirmed violations of financial integrity and ethics policies. The matter has been referred to law enforcement for potential criminal prosecution. I watched from my desk as security escorted Dorian out of the building. He carried a single cardboard box with his personal belongings, his face a mask of bitter resentment. As he passed my desk, I expected him to say something, a threat, an insult, some final act of petty revenge. Instead, he kept his eyes forward and said nothing. He knew he'd lost, and there was nothing left to say. The investigation had uncovered over $200,000 in fraudulent expenses and wage theft. Criminal charges were pending, and the company was pursuing civil action to recover the stolen funds. Marcus stopped by my desk after Dorian left. I can't believe he just walked past you like that, he said. He knows it's over, I replied. There's no point in fighting when you've already lost. My first day as Director of Operations felt surreal. I sat in Dorian's old office, looking out at the same view he'd enjoyed while terrorizing his employees. But everything was about to change. My first official act was approving the refunds for all the employees Dorian had cheated. Brenda got her $3,000 back. The woman who'd sold her car received compensation plus interest. Every stolen dollar was returned with the company's apologies. Next, I established new policies for anonymous reporting and financial oversight. No one would ever again have the power to manipulate payroll or expenses without multiple levels of review. I called a department meeting to introduce my management philosophy. No one should fear doing the right thing, I told the team. That's the culture we're building here. Respect, integrity, and accountability, those aren't just words on a poster. The room erupted in applause, and I saw hope in people's faces for the first time in months. We were going to rebuild this department the right way. At the end of the day, I cleared out Dorian's old desk. I threw away his custom pen that was engraved with "Leaders don't ask permission" and replaced it with a crayon drawing my daughter had made for me. 6 months later, our department had transformed completely. Morale was higher than it had been in years, productivity was up, and people actually enjoyed coming to work. I kept Dorian's business card pinned to my bulletin board as a reminder of how power can corrupt and how important it is to use authority responsibly. Every decision I made was guided by a simple principle: treat people with dignity and respect. The criminal case against Dorian was moving slowly through the courts, but the civil case had already resulted in full financial recovery. He'd lost his house, his car, and his reputation. Justice had been served, though it had taken time. I sent one final email to the entire company, sharing lessons learned from our experience. "We don't rise by tearing others down," I wrote. "We rise by lifting what's broken and building something better." My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter's teacher, praising her recent improvement in school. Stability at home had helped her flourish, just like stability at work had helped our department thrive. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. I hadn't gotten even with Dorian Burke, I'd gotten promoted. And that was the sweetest victory of all.